appreciate that. Drunk Sunday sounds like a podcast I would watch. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great podcast name, right? Drunk Sundays? I'd watch that. Yeah, a good catch there, Leo. Rahul, it was Rahul, right? Rahul, you got the starts of a potential hit podcast there. Bisma, I think you were here last Sunday, Bisma. If you were here last Sunday, we're continuing the project from last Sunday, okay? Rahul says, I just want to be a drunk, silently listening. That's okay. That's okay. Lewis says, I'm from Montgomery County, not too far out from Washington. Yeah, okay, sure. I know where Montgomery County is. Cool. Yeah, I lived in Northern Virginia in Alexandria for 6 years. I went to school in Washington, D.C., but I was a broke college student. I could not afford the D.C. rents. So I lived like 45 minutes out of D.C. I had to take the train. I lived with two other guys in a crappy basement apartment. But it was cheap. It was what I could afford, you know. It's one of those things you do when you're in college, right? Like you have to get through college, so it was just a cheap place to live. But yeah, it's a nice city out there. Monium says lived 5 years in Washington D.C. Okay, cool, yeah. Yeah, lots of people seem to go through DC, right? DC is a very transient town, right? Lots of people move in and out, right? It's kind of hard to find people who've established roots there, kind of hard to make friends. But yeah, I loved it. I thought it was a cool city, very walkable city for the most part. But yeah, I miss those times. I've only been back twice since then. But yeah, DC is a great city if you guys have never been there. Yeah, great city. Rahul says, well, Leo says something very important here. Just hope you're not doing drunk job interviews. Yeah, guys. Pro tip, very important. Don't show up to job interviews drunk. I just watched the recap of part 1. Great. My drunk mind finds corporate stuff difficult. Coding is altogether another thing. Yep. Okay. First of all, couple things to look at there, right? First of all, for those of you guys that don't know, I do archive all of my Sunday lessons on YouTube. So I know there's some of you that are new today. If you want to, if you please, stay today. But then if you want to review part 1, go ahead and go to my YouTube archives. We'll review some of part 1 today also. But, Rahul brings up an important point of that. If you ever miss a session or miss a part, you have to leave early, whatever. It's always on YouTube. So feel free to always check that, right? Finding the corporate stuff difficult and the coding altogether is another thing. Okay. Hard to disagree with that, right? Some corporate stuff is very difficult. Some people love the coding, love the hands at the keyboard work, right? I get it. Here's the thing though, guys. If you do that, you are capping the advancement that you will have in your career, right? You can always be the coder if you want, but that's only going to take you so far. So I get it, moving into the corporate side, leadership side, stuff like that, it can be a little intimidating or whatever, however you want to call it. But unless you're willing to do that, unless you're able to do that, there will always be a cap on how far you're going to advance in your career. And that may not seem like a bad thing right now, but as you grow, as you develop your skills, as you have a family, you have more obligations in life, you're going to want to advance, right? So some of the stuff that I'm going to show you today specifically is aimed a little bit more at like the earlier parts of your career, right? I'll make mentions of the later parts of your career, but you are going to want to learn all of those parts because you are going to want to advance at some point. I guarantee you, right? like coding may sound great, but after 5 years, 7 years, you're going to want to do something else, right? Or do more, right? So keep that in mind, guys. Keep that in mind. Rohan, I haven't seen you in a little bit. Hope you're doing well out there in Vizag, India. Hope you're doing well. Taha, welcome. I think it might be your first time. Welcome, Taha. Nice to see you here. Zeneb, our good friend Zeneb. I think you were here last Sunday, so glad to see you back. Hope you're doing well. Coding Mood says they are from Vizag also. See, I love those connections. That's why we ask people sometimes to introduce themselves. Reese says Ashley here from South Africa. Welcome, Ashley. I think it's your first time here. So welcome. Glad to see you here. Let's see. I think that might be all the comments that I'm seeing in my chat. Yeah, Leo, thanks so much for all the great work you're doing over there on YouTube. Thank you. All right, I think that's it. If anybody else that's standing on the sidelines, maybe you're too shy to introduce yourself, that's okay. Feel free to do that, or just feel free to follow along. It's up to you. But basically, we're just going to get started on the project. And, today we're going to be talking a lot about Agile planning. I think most of you are going to be new to that. That's what my gut feeling tells me. So I'm anticipating a lot of questions today. And again, this is one of those things where I may explain things quickly because it's just natural to me. So I always encourage people to interrupt me and ask questions, and I will try to keep an eye on the chat. But I think that today it's going to be especially important because I think today is going to be potentially challenging for some of you to understand because some of the concepts aren't always easy to understand, or you may not always understand the value of them. So just as a reminder, today especially, I'm going to encourage all of you to, use the chat, ask questions. Hey, that didn't make sense. Can you explain that? Hey, why are you doing that? Okay? Because otherwise I'm just going to continue and then, that's it. And then also during like the second part of what we do, I'm going to be asking for a lot of audience participation, right? I'm going to be relying on all of you to be putting things in the chat. We'll get to that. But I'm going to be relying on all of you to start sending stuff in the chat, okay? So be ready for that. All right, so let me set up some of the stuff I'm going to need here on my end. Let's see. Need this. This. All right. All right. Just one more. All right, so let's get started. Today, we're going to be talking about the second part of our project series on building an entire project from beginning to end, right? So as we discussed last week, if you're anticipating a lot of coding, a lot of Python and the libraries, we're not there yet, right? Getting a project off the ground still involves a lot of work, a lot of setup. And today in particular, we're going to be focused on creating a plan so that we know what we're doing, right? You have to be able to create a plan so that you're able to, one, keep your team accountable, But two, you kind of have to have a feeling of where you're going, right? And in many ways, the plan also kind of sets out the methodology that you want to follow, right? Very, very important to do that, right? So that's what we're going to do today. A lot of today's focus is going to be on agile planning. How does the contract that we have in place with our client translate into a project and a plan that we can then say, okay, let's execute the plan, right? So that's really kind of our focus today. So what I want to do is I want to start off with a little bit of review from last week. Because where we stand now in terms of our project and in terms of our team is that we now have a signed contract in place with our client. How did we get there? So that's what I want to review. So we discussed last week that we're going to have methodology, project planning, creation, and deployment as the general phases that we want to follow in our plan, right? We have a methodology that holds us to something that we can say, hey, this is the data science process we followed. We're going to plan our project. We're going to actually create the project by executing it out, and then we're going to deploy the project.